Let's get started. And presenting today is John Collins, an analyst from Gigaom. How are you doing today, John?
I'm extremely well over here in the UK.
Extremely well.
Extremely well, yeah. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, definitely. So today we're going to talk about DevSecOps tools and the criteria for evaluating them and development process tools. And yeah, I'm pretty excited about this. I'm sure you are too.
And there's a lot to unpack there as well, Jeremy. It's a huge umbrella of a space. Before we get onto it, I'll just say a few words about me. So I'm the archetypal fraud that spent a few years as a programmer. Then I was running systems, then I was consulting, but I was always just a few pages ahead in the user manual. And then I discovered this thing called being an analyst, which meant I didn't have to break anything anymore and no one shouted at me. And I thought, that's great. I think what's really wonderful about being an analyst for me is that I get to speak to lots of great people that know far more than I do about how to use technology. And that's really what I want to bring here. And I'm representing Gigaom, which means I'm representing a whole bunch of engineers that know far more about this stuff than I do. But hopefully I'll collate a bunch of stuff. And on the DevSecOps side, I mean, the trouble with DevSecOps is, I mean, who wouldn't want to be a DevSecOps vendor, right? It's just like the coolest term right now. It's got Dev, it's got DevOps, it's got security, it's got everything. Yeah. So everyone's doing it. And our job as a company is to kind of pull that apart. And if you actually break it down into pieces, no one wants DevSecOps. No one goes, God, do you know, if we had DevSecOps, that would solve all our problems. No one's saying that.
Yeah, there's no shiny cool features or.
There's no, you don't go to Best Buy and go, yeah, can I have some of that DevSecOps, please? Yeah, no, that'd be fantastic. It's not going to happen. What people are doing is they're trying to solve a whole bunch of problems in building applications. They're trying to build them faster. Building them faster, it's the devil's triangle of, you know, quality, risk, and speed and functionality. That's for, but you know, it's that devil's thing. Generally, in a lot of organizations, I remember an end user saying this to me once. They said, "Those analysts, they've got no idea what it's like in here. You know, it's the wheels are falling off. There's a board full of things that no one's fixing. It's firefighting. There's massive growth, customers are screaming, etc. And DevSecOps has to fit into that world. So what I wanted to do in this presentation was kind of triage it a little bit and pull things apart and say, okay, let's relax. Let's think about what problem we're trying to solve here. And let's think about, and then I was going to drill in specifically to the development process aspects of DevSecOps for reasons that I'll give. And see what we can bring to other people's parties. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah, DevSecOps is one of those things that's very vague, and I think a lot of people are kind of wondering. It's like the DevOps term. You know, if you ask 10 people what DevOps means, you get 10 different answers. And I think DevSecOps adds another layer to that of mystery. So I think a lot of folks that are watching today probably want to demystify it a little bit.
It's the best possible branding thing, isn't it? It's Dev, it's Ops, it's Sec, it's DevSecOps. You know, you can hear the jingle. But I think interestingly, and I'm going to jump through a few of these things, but interestingly, when I was running IT systems, I was working for a subsidiary of Alcatel, and I had various, you know, security was always an issue. It was a lot internal problems back then, because we hadn't really fully invented the internet yet. Generally security was something that you only got money for after something had gone wrong, because the question the CFO would ask is, do I need this and do I need it now? Is it more of a priority than everything else that you're asking me for? And if I couldn't immediately answer, yes, you need it now because, then I wouldn't get any money. He'd say, well, you know, it's clearly not as important in your heart, therefore. And I was working in Paris, they say things like that, you know, it doesn't matter in your soul. These days it's changed a bit. but I think that's still true. You've got to have a real genuine reason why to do security related stuff. But these days, and I was speaking to a colleague, Shay, about this, and he's going to be writing our next iteration of our security and development reporting. And I said, that's what I remember. And he said, yeah, it's not so much these days. What's actually happening is security is massively important, but the security teams have been kept out of the loop. And now they're going, okay, you're seeing the problems you're starting to have. Maybe you should involve us a bit more. And so suddenly it's the kind of, and I jokingly talk about DevSecOps being reinserting security into DevOps. It's literally what the term's done. It's expanded and it dropped in. And that's what the CISOs are doing and the security teams are doing. They're going, maybe we need to work in a less siloed way. And that can happen nicely. That can happen less nicely. So someone I heard on a call recently said, people they hate each other was actually what they were saying. And I've not seen that. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of sullen moments of the discontent, but hate is quite a strong term.
Coming from a software engineering side, I would say that there's some animosity between development and security at many organizations that I've been in, and a lot of that is just conflicting interests. Like the developers are like, hey, I want access to all these servers, I want all the passwords, I want to be able to do whatever I want and push it out the door. And the security people are like, yeah, that's why we had our last giant security problem, is because we do that. And so it's kind of, so there is some animosity, I think, back and forth. Each person's trying to do their job, and the security people need things secure, the developers want to develop. And I'm hoping that DevSecOps movement is the solution to a lot of those problems.
The trouble with stereotypes is they're wrong and they're true. And I think you can talk about developers, you can talk about security people. And so when I was running security stuff, I became such a tin pot general because I hated seeing things go wrong. I hated all the risks. I hated the consequences. I knew it was my head on the block for not fixing them. And so I started getting really frustrated and cross and trying to sort it out by stopping people from doing things. And then I realized that stopping people from doing things was actually a risk in itself. It feels good, but if you don't actually deliver anything, then the business goes down the tubes. So I think there's lots of these kind of, you end up with a certain psychology. And we've got on this slide, we've got 3 ways that people have been looking to address some of this stuff. You've got the kind of start in the right place kind of stuff. So, policy as code, security by design, getting people around the table early on, and actually baking security into the requirements. That's cool. That all sounds great. So there's that sort of stuff happening. At the other side, you've got zero trust architecture, and this principle that you could just build it all in such a way that it's robust from the get-go. So you don't have to worry about your code because you're building it in a fortress, and that sounds great as well. And then we've got my favorite term, which is shift left, which kind of implies that you can kind of roll the snowball further and further up the hill towards the requirements, and it's just going to get easier and easier. And actually what happens is it just gets harder and harder as you try and get, we got to do this stuff really early. And really? Oh God. So, but it's a good principle. And I think when we look at, we had to do some work when we started covering DevSecOps in anger last year. We've been looking at these things in isolation forever, but like what the heck is this DevSecOps thing? We started writing about it, and then we realized we were trying to embrace everything. And actually there's a whole bunch of kind of application scanning, there's application hardening, the RASP stuff, there's secure containers, there's microsegmentation, there's all kinds of ways that you can make applications more secure. And if you try to cover them all in a single report, then you end up with a report that no one ever is going to read, because it would be Bible thick and almost impenetrable. like every good security thing should be. So what we chose to do last year was to think about what are the areas that are specifically going to apply within application development to de-risk the process and the outputs. And that's kind of what is DevSecOps to us, is because everything else is solved. And we wrote another report about, not solved, but about dependency management and vulnerability management and so on. And we thought about what are the bits that still need a lot of effort here. So I'm jumping ahead. I mean, this is some of the stuff that it could mean. And yeah, sure, there's security is about permeability. It's about attack surface. It's about probability and impact, therefore risk. It's about the old adage, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. If you look, the bad guys are psychopathically uncaring about where they're going to make money. They're just going for the easiest route to getting that money. Ransomware, yeah, sure, I'll do some of that. Pushing drugs, doesn't matter, because it's whatever's easiest. So we've got to cover it across everything. Otherwise, we'll just leave another back door in some way.
Yeah. And I could imagine that depending on your application and your organization, like I could see here that you have 5 things listed. I could see where there are some applications, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's some applications and usages where they can pick some areas to focus, like application hardening. They could say, well, we have a static website that plays videos, so our application hardening isn't nearly as important as our CDN, for instance, or or could be the opposite. They could say, well, our application uses a whole bunch of third-party services and connects to them nilly-willy, so that's where we need to focus. We don't need to focus as much on the infrastructure risk or whatever. So am I basically reading that correctly, that you can take different
100%, and ultimately, I mean, this is going way back to kind of good traditional cybersecurity practice, which is the only risk that matters is business risk. And if you start from that point of view, so what are the risks to our business? Well, they could be brand risk, they could be customer risk, they could be compliance risk, etc. And then what's going to cause those risks? And if you're, as you say, if you're a media company and no one can watch your streams, then that's bad. If people can watch your streams without paying, that's bad too. But those are almost business problems. There's not too much point in addressing stuff that isn't going to either be around assuring customer privacy of their data, making sure that the service can continue, those kind of relatively big questions, but relatively straightforward questions to focus on. So a lot of this stuff should be kept in that context of what are the security problems we're trying to solve here. So if you haven't got a risk register, people out there, that's probably where I would start in terms of, just spend an hour or so thinking, well, what does matter to my organization? So focusing down onto, I mean, this is a curious one, because I come, I'm old enough to come from the days of waterfall methodologies, and it makes me laugh that some people still think, no, waterfall's a great thing. And I think, well, you've clearly got 2 years on your hands with nothing else to do other than write software really slowly.
Yeah.
The downside of losing waterfall is the fact that we don't actually have a set way of expressing what a pipeline looks like. So everyone's got that. Is it, when we talk about CI/CD, which bit's CI, which bit's CD, which bit's development, where does programming happen, where does testing happen? I don't think you could find anyone that would have the same answer in terms of where does testing happen these days, for example. And so the same question hits with where does security happen? It's an issue. So this picture is essentially saying security needs to happen everywhere, for sure. But then recognize that no one's got the same picture. but the same point stays true.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a mess, Jeremy. It's a mess.
Yeah, like I said, as a background as a software developer, testing, that was always a question when we're working on something. And some people are like, oh, we test it before we even write the software, and then we forget about it. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where they're like, no, we're going to test all of this before it's deployed, and I don't care how you build it. This is where my interests lie. We're testing it before we're putting it on our servers. And yeah, it looks different everywhere, and everybody has strong opinions on where it should be. So I wouldn't see security being any different in that respect.
Back to it being a business risk, I think the really interesting thing when we speak to people about testing, security testing, the way that the problems manifest is often a mad panic on deployment day. There's no way we can release this. So the thing that should have been shifted left is the panic, if you like, because it was going to happen. So you get two options. One is to release something that that's going to break, or you hope it isn't, but you keep your fingers crossed behind your back as you hit the deploy button. Or the second thing is you delay, and more often than not, you end up with these delays. And the trouble with the delays is no one knows the efficient way of dealing with them. So you say, well, let's not release it straight away. And then you're in a kind of vague space of, so what do we do in order to make that thing happen? You have to almost define a methodology on the fly in order to say, yeah, it's going to take 2 weeks. The first thing we need to do is go back to X, run through that. The next thing we need to do is identify what are the key things that we absolutely have to have top secure, make sure they're watertight and robust. So that doesn't exist, so you make it up. And that's what really slows things down. So when we were looking at it's easy for me to sit and pontificate about these things, but as I say, coming from a background of having had those challenges and hearing that those challenges are still prevalent today, the question is then, well, how to solve for that? And this is where shift left becomes really difficult. I don't have a problem with the term shift left. I think it's not about shift left, though. I think it's about doing the right thing at the right time. So you start left and then you do it wherever it is. And that's really the starting point for when we were thinking about the development process. So how does DevSecOps apply to the development process itself? And so we essentially interviewed a bunch of people, spent a bunch of time with vendors who said, yeah, we've solved all the problems in the world. That's great. And massaged the information, punched it around a bit, distilled it down, threw it up in the air, see what landed, et cetera, et cetera. And essentially, by a bit of background, our key criteria reports got a fancy pants name, but essentially they're a how-to guide for writing an RFP. And an RFP is structured in terms of what does this thing need to do, and then how does it need to do it? So it's got functional requirements and non-functional requirements. And then the functional requirements tend to be divided into two. You've either got the mandatory functional requirements, yeah, every product has to have this. And they give you a filter. So it's literally, give me all the vendors that deliver on these things. Yeah. And that'll give you, so there'll be 100 vendors, and you say, well, that'll get me down to a list of 10 vendors that actually do the things that every solution in this space should do. And then you say, well, out of those 10, which ones of them do the things I need? And that's where the differentiating, the highly desirable functional requirements kick in. So that's essentially the background to our key criteria report. And you can see I've got a little crib list here. I'm sure everyone can see it, of what we saw as the mandatory functional requirements, or what we call table stakes. So you need dashboards, you need integration with all the other tools in the tool chain. And what you're doing, therefore, with those two pieces is feeding your CI/CD chain into a security dashboard and going, is this thing running in a secure way? Am I addressing all the risks at every stage? And then you add security gates onto that. So you can say, right, okay, I've got to a point just before deployment. Am I happy that I've de-risked the application and I've built it in such a way that the application is going to deliver without throwing customer data up into the ether, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, you need access controls. And then the other thing we saw as every platform should do this was some form of opinionated. It's a great word. You only hear it in the software development circles. It's a very cloud native word. Basically, guidance. Guidance. Is it opinionated? Does it tell you what to do? Does it control what to do? So in this case, opinionated remediation. Essentially, does it tell you how to fix it? Yeah. So we saw those things as the kind of mandatories, and then the that should actually say functional requirements. Oh, sorry, no. Then I played with these slides a little bit, but I'm gonna jump ahead to the next one and show you the key criteria, which were in the middle here. So policy-driven automation. Can we drive something by actually writing down what it is that we're trying to solve in the first place? So do we care most about CCPA? Do we care most about not enabling backdoors into the stuff? So how SQL injections might be the most important thing that we're trying to deal with here. So how do we make sure that data is locked away through a certain design pattern, whatever? That was the first thing. Dependency analysis, so just being able to understand the dependencies in code and then make decisions about them. Audit reporting on the compliance point and on the internal compliance point. So how well does a solution actually address the needs of being able to say that that application is fine? How do you measure that application is fine? And then tell someone that cares about it that that's true. A big one is secrets management, which is it's different to all the other ones, but ultimately it's a big problem everyone's trying to solve right now, which is not allowing developers to have visibility on your website password. It's not rocket science, but it's really hard to manage, particularly if you're storing stuff in GitHub or whatever. But over the years, obviously GitHub has features for this now, but it didn't always, and not every platform does. And then the other thing that's really kicked in is the infrastructure as code side of things. So because an application doesn't exist in isolation, if it ever did. So these days, to actually see the infrastructure as code and assess that for security and how well it's being built and so on. Those were the things that we saw as right now are more likely to be the things that people are really trying to acquire in order to improve their security posture.
Yeah, that looks like a great list.
It's be nice if it works, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just find something that checks all those boxes and you're done.
Well, and obviously you can weight these things. I think everyone needs secrets management right now. Maybe a more, if you're a healthcare organization, audit reporting is going to be really important to you. If you're a bigger organization with great relationships with your security teams, then policy-driven automation is probably going to be something that you can actually pick up and run with. And if you're very cloud native, then support for infrastructure as code is going to be a primary concern. So it's fun to weight these things, and actually then they give you a different evaluation. What we do with our evaluations is the vanilla one, but every organization is different, and we recognize that. So jump back, because I'm not going to say my slides are in the wrong order, because that would be wrong of me, but let's pretend they are for a moment. So on the non-functional requirements, these largely came out of conversations that we had with organizations. So flexibility is hugely important. And I'm stating the bleeding obvious here, bear with me, but there's a kind of tendency with a lot of tools to either be too flexible, so it takes forever to build to them, or they're too constrained. And there's a place for both. So flexibility has to be something that an organization decides, for themselves what they need. Shift left effectiveness, we've kind of talked, how easy is it to make things happen earlier in the decision-making chain? But then that goes back with end-to-end coverage, because it's about making sure that the outputs are correct, but they've been correct at every stage. And some of these things, they sound like philosophically obvious, but actually then they're very, very hard to do. So
Absolutely.
They're both nice to haves and need to haves. Solution ecosystem, just because the CI/CD landscape is so complex, the whole DevOps tool vendor landscape is massively fragmented. I could bang on about that for a while. I think we're heading for a massive consolidation wave. I hope we are, because it made my job easier. But I mean, there's an irony for right now. I wouldn't want to be running development groups and trying to decide the tooling for it, because you either go with the tools that you use because they're what you use, or you're faced with this kind of fairground of options with lights flashing and buzzers buzzing and so on. There's so many ways you could do something, which make it horrible. That sounded like a big deep
Oh yeah. I mean, I've seen it plenty of times myself, where there's just a couple of options, like say, we're gonna do container management. Okay, well, there's 2 or 3 really big ones, and there's no reason to branch out. And then you'll pick something else, and you'll be like, okay, what about secrets management, like you mentioned? Oh, okay, well, there's only 200 different options we could take there. And the evaluation gets tricky, because you can't evaluate them all.
It's the hidden dependencies between tools that I think really get people like needing a certain needing an Atlassian login to use a tool. You think, oh, that's the perfect tool for us. Oh wait, we're not using Jira. So but now there's a lot to get right before you even start. And getting right also around licensing. There's a load of freemium models for tooling, and or very low cost entry point models, etc. We often see 2 types of models. One of which is really easy on ramp, doesn't necessarily do the complicated stuff very well, and the other is really hard to get going with. Great. But if you want to go big with this thing, and across loads of domains, generally a vendor has kind of picked one of those 2 things, and they're going for the enterprise first, or they're going for the kind of easy in. So that's certainly something to watch for. And then obviously it all adds up into, return on investment in risk terms is essentially, did it cost me something that I could afford? And how much has it actually reduced my risk? And is that measurable in terms of my throughput? None of the tools that we've looked at should slow things down. They should just make things better. So that's important. So a few things that we're keeping an eye on in terms of emerging technologies. Compliance is always a minefield, and just having encoding of policies, and again, that policy as code kind of thing. We're seeing it from the bigger vendors, but we're not seeing it as it would be great to have a kind of standard for that. I seem to remember talking about similar things in 1999, but round we go. Broader architectural support, it's a curio, because languages are still proliferating, but I think over the past 2 years, I think we've kind of decided that it's a Kubernetes future, haven't we? That's I think that's you look at, and we've also kind of decided. I know that the GitOps sessions at KubeCon were kind of very, very well attended. We've kind of decided that there's a process that we can follow that it almost goes back to my waterfall question around, we don't have a kind of set of terms anymore. Well, maybe it's starting to emerge, and it would be great to see security terminology align to that. A lot of security frameworks, though, they're pretty much they're huge. They're huge, and they're monolithic, and they're designed for the DoD, and so we almost need light versions of those huge frameworks and certification frameworks and so on, that would then map onto something like GitOps, and then we're kind of not done, but at least we've got a good starting point.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of vendors who try to embrace compliance as a part of their selling point? And I guess this question comes from, I've worked for healthcare organizations and a DoD contractor, since you just mentioned that. And compliance was, the number one thing for us, where, we would come in and say, okay, it absolutely has to fit within this box. And most of the time, it's, well, we've got a couple of the things checked, but not all of them, so we need to move on. With some of these vendors, are they mapped around that compliance to where they say, we are your solution for X, and everything moves from there? Or is it still kind of a grab bag and effort on both sides?
That's a really good question, and again, I think we're seeing it come from two directions. One is, and please don't ask me because I didn't prepare this before the presentation, but one is certain vendors also have massive DoD contracts, and I can't remember if any of these that I'm going to list are those vendors. So I don't want to talk to that, but it's certainly generally the vendors on the scale that we're looking at, if they've got those big contracts, they're very, very keen, as in they're then in the working groups around certification and compliance, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And they're writing papers about it, and they're wonking out on it. They're really putting their backs into it, and so it's more than just lip service. Yeah. And then a lot of, as you know, a lot of vendors in the DevOps space have arrived as a response to a need. So often they've started as, we used to work at Facebook and we saw that there was a big problem. I think that's how it's going to come back to me, Honeycomb started. So there's, when those sorts of vendors happen, they tend to respond to that need really well, and then they grow out from there. So less so. But it tends to be those two sides.
Nice.
So I want to, how are we doing for time? Are we doing for time? So
yeah,
good?
We're good.
Amazing. So I wanted to just bounce a few things that we found as we wrote the reports about how people are actually building and delivering on this stuff. And then we'll go into the market landscape as we've seen it, and with all the caveats of markets can go down as well as up. But I think the four things. One thing we love to do at Gigaom, one thing I love to do as just as a person, it gets me out of bed in the morning, is to actually talk to people that have actually done it, and they go, and they'll tell you something quite crucial that you wouldn't have thought of. So these points are a distillation of that. And as I said at the beginning, no one's looking to buy DevSecOps. What they might be looking to do is address a specific problem. And so to see DevSecOps as an answer rather than a question is a good thing. It's a bit like digital transformation. It's one of these big waffly terms, but actually it's a really good touchstone for shaping the kind of solution that you're trying to deliver. So DevSecOps as a principle means security end-to-end that makes your applications deliver with less risk. That's got to be a good thing. So, but just make sure it's happening and being delivered as part of a measurable initiative. I think the reviewing existing practices, there will already be lots of great things going on. And a big mistake anyone can make with any area like this is assuming no one's thought of it yet. When we use a term like DevSecOps, it's a manifestation of a solution to a problem a lot of people know we have. So when I say review of existing practices, that's also about engaging with people and finding out what problems they're trying to solve, rather than, and I wouldn't even state it if it wasn't actually what I'd seen, rather than rushing out there and saying, we're implementing this and it's going to change what you do, and you know, etc. And they're like, kind of, who the heck are you? How do you believe that we didn't have that problem already, and we haven't been trying 3 or 4 times to address it? Have you seen the tools we've already got, etc., etc.? So it's about engaging with people on their level. Setting scope is obviously really important. So don't try and boil the ocean. I think that's stating the obvious. But measurability, I think in the security space, it's really, really hard. It's really hard to show a financial impact of security. And I wouldn't try to. I would try to show a risk management. So I think we've probably got 3 factors. One is just being able to measure the risks across the development process, and the tools that we're looking at should be able to help us with that. And then how many things we've dealt with, therefore we no longer have any, you know, or we reduce the number of red flags from 139 to 72. That's massive progress. So that's obviously, and the tools can give you some of that. I would also bring in some of the measurable but less data-oriented ones, like we're now having a regular meeting once a week where we assess these things, and here's the status report that we generated at every meeting, and here's what we're looking at right now. So it shows flow and it shows progress. Security is never solved; it's never finished. Yeah. So what you've got to do is show a dynamism and continuity and sustainability to your practices. And yeah, management and staff are like, get everyone on board, which is the kind of point I made before.
Yeah.
So I guess to the money slide. So we looked at a bunch of vendors, and brief explanation on the Gigaom radar. So if you're trying to produce any 2-dimensional map, you're going to end up with some kind of matrix or quadrant or something. And we did play with various different diagrams and shapes, trying to kind of do something different with 2 dimensions, but 2 dimensions are 2 dimensions. So we've ended up with 2 axes, but the axes that we see as most important, it says market landscape here, but we don't care about market share. We care about functionality and ability to deliver. And generally, because we care about what organizations actually need, organizations are looking for 2 things. They either want, and this is a massive generalization, but generally, that's why I use the word generally, they want a large number of things that cover most of their scenarios pretty well. So they want a kind of platform. They want a basis, and you know, some of the bigger vendors are very good at delivering those kind of one-stop shop kind of things. Or an organization needs to solve a specific problem, and they're looking for a particularly innovative feature, and it could be secrets management. I mean, I love the round feature flags. It is fascinating to just see. It's such a specific thing, and yet you know it's a market all by itself. So that's where we kind of tend to measure the 2 types of organization. And when we did this research, we assessed, and I'll get to the assessment criteria because this is actually generated through maths. We have the right to kind of tweak and shift people around a bit, but it's actually based on how well they fulfill the criteria that I spoke about before. But we found it interestingly, like company like infrastructure as code vendor Chef had actually really put their backs into thinking about the development process, and we were extremely impressed with what they offered. And because they came from an IAC background, obviously they were very strong in that. GitLab's everywhere. I mean, they're in every single report we write. It gets a bit boring. Sorry, GitLab guys. But they as long as you're happy with everything in GitLab, then everything's in GitLab and it's all great. GitLab's only issue is when you don't want everything in GitLab, and then the interfaces between GitLab and the rest of the world become your problem. So JFrog are generally doing a good job in this area. They weren't necessarily innovating that fast. They tend to be focusing on specifics of what they do around artifacts and Edge and so on. And Veracode, old player, Micro Focus, old player. So you'd expect them to be doing reasonably well here. They've got all the features. But then we started to look at the kind of more innovative companies. Bridge Crew we were very impressed with. Alside we were very impressed with in terms of what it delivered, but it wasn't trying to do more than what it actually does, and we'll get on to what that is in a minute. And the one complete outlier that I just wanted to add, because they're never going to appear on a radar by them with other vendors, was DB Maestro. So they're doing all of this for databases, and it's such an important area. I know that the serverless people say, well, you know, data doesn't matter. It's all kind of ethereal, but you do need to manage it all in the same way. So anyway, there we go. 12 minutes left, I recognize. And so how did we arrive at those figures? Well, first we assessed each of the vendors against those criteria. You can see a dash where they don't do anything. The way that we measure is generally you get 2 pluses if you do the thing. If you do the thing better than everyone else, then we ask why, and then you get an extra plus, but that extra plus has to be justified for some reason. So just thinking you're brilliant at it, that's not enough. If everyone's brilliant at it, they all get 2 pluses, because that's the nature of the commoditization of the industry. So no, it's not like a kind of, you know, kids at a school prom. This is not, you know, we can't give badges to everybody, and we do need to recognize commoditization over time. But you can see how, for example, Chef does pretty well across multiple areas, and yeah, it's got 3 pluses in various places, and it covers everything, and therefore it's more of a platform player, and that's how it justifies its high position. And other vendors, maybe like Alside, it does the drift identification extremely well, and then it's quite weak in other areas. So that doesn't mean it's a bad company. It just means it's more of a feature than a platform player. And so that's how we assess those. And then similarly for the evaluation metrics, yeah, how flexible, and we go to end users to find out this information. We make our own decisions based on our engineering backgrounds. We run demos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we build the picture. And there we go. So overall, every year we're doing this again. And it'll all change, and we get vendors saying, I thought we were great and now we're not. We're like, no, you're still great. It's just other people have improved even more than you have.
Yeah.
And round we go.
And so yeah, if you go back to the other slide, that looks like a great place to
which one before
11. Yeah, but that looks like a great place to start. So if you're an organization, like say if I were a leader of an organization, look at these, I would draw this out exactly how you have, and then start taking our business problems and saying, where do they land? You know, where does this business problem land? Does this require a bunch of maturity? Does this require some features that the other ones have? And yeah, I just think this is a really good way to lay it out. And you can say, where are all our dots landing as far as the business needs? And then you could flip that right over and be like, oh, okay, it looks like everything is in this quadrant. Let's look at Chef, you know, for this.
Yeah, And the nice thing is, it's actually all maths. So if you start from scenario, we're very keen on the term scenario. So essentially, again, no one buys DevSecOps. So it's worth finding out from a bunch of organizations. I don't have the answer to this. I'm saying we should do it. Why they would be implementing these tools. And let's say 30% of people say for compliance reasons, 20% say because it's part of an initiative driven by the security team, and the other 40% say it's just general improvement of as we consolidate our platforms. If we took each of those three, we could then say, okay, so how do those three impact these things? So as I mentioned before, if you're more compliance oriented, then policy-driven automation, audit reporting might be more important to you. So let's give it a higher weighting. Then you give those things a higher weighting, and then you regenerate this picture, and you find out that if compliance is your thing, well, Sonatype's the one. So they might not be so strong on certain features, but boy, is their audit reporting the most solid. So that's what we can do with organizations manually at the moment. And it's certainly something we're looking into to building as tooling as we go forward. The danger is that you'd end up with like, well, we've assessed your needs and found that nobody does. They're all none of them are going to help you. So I'm ever so sorry, you're just going to have to go home. So we need to build in checks and balances to make sure that's not the case. But it's all about the math.
Yeah, so that's great. Well, thank you very much for presenting that. That's great. Do we want to jump into Q&A?
Sure.
For a few minutes here.
Yeah, let's see what we got.
Yeah, for those of you watching, there's a Q&A chat box there on the right-hand side. We can click and open up, and we'll see if we have any questions.
Okay, and I'll put this picture back because it's more interesting than a Q&A slide.
Yeah.
Just while anyone's thinking of maybe asking a question, that I do see our job as a privilege because we've had a lot of debate internally about what these things mean, about how to structure them. You know, we found out this from somebody and found out that from somebody else, and what does, et cetera, et cetera. When I actually had a real job working in IT and then working as a security consultant, the one thing I lacked was time to actually have those debates and those conversations and then work stuff out. So it's a real privilege position that we're in to be able to just take the time to do it. I guess that's why we get paid. That's why we're here.
Absolutely. And the proliferation of tools in tech is something that, you know, I've always gotten excited about. And, you know, I love making tools and having tools and finding tools, and probably not as common as it used to be, but I'm still one of those people that get pretty excited when I see all of these different tools available. And it's like, oh, cool. I remember getting worried about that back in 1999, or that was roughly when I started. And, you know, I could remember, you know, seeing tools that are like, wow, that's a complete silver bullet solution for a problem that I had in 2004.
It's really interesting because, yeah, back when I was a programmer, which was far too long ago, essentially it was the time where, you know, it's like being a carpenter and you had to make your own chisel before you could use it. The notion of a stack didn't really exist. Yeah. Whereas now I went back to, I did some PHP coding recently, and, you know, I play with various things, and it's the ability to build things fast. It's just absolutely transformed. And the problem that you face is then scaling it, I think. You know, creating something new is not the gating factor anymore. And that's where this stuff comes in. I still see this whole space as relatively immature. And as I said earlier, what I'm hoping with GitOps and with containerized applications and Kubernetes as a target, we can actually lock down a certain number of things, which means we can lock down the risks, which is a much better place to be.
Absolutely. All right, so it looks like we don't have any Q&A. So thank you, John, for presenting this. This is great. It's been some great conversation for sure. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking about DevSecOps again soon.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd add at the end is my Twitter handle is JONNO on Twitter. If anyone wants to follow up or ask any questions there, and as I say, there's me, but there's also a team of engineers behind me and above me and around me to field anything you need. So just shout.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because we are recording this, and the recording will be sent out for those of you who have joined late. The recording will be sent out via email. So yeah, if you have any questions, hit them up on Twitter. All right. Thank you, John.
Cool. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Jeremy.
Thanks.